Om Jananim Saradam Devim Ramakrishna Jagadgurum Padapadme Tayo Shritva Pranamami Muhurmuhu. So we were in our previous class on the divine play of Sri Ma Sharda Devi. We saw how divine transformation took place in Sarada when she was living with her husband, both in Kamarpukur and Jairambati. By the time Master left Kamarpukur, Sri Ramakrishna left Kamarpukur for Calcutta a few months later. She stayed nearly 7 months in both Kamarpukur, Jairambati and Kamarpukur. So the Swami Shardanji writes that after she left for Jairambati, when Sri Ramakrishna left Kamarpukur for Dakshineshwar, he had come on a long leave. He took almost 7 months off from his duties in Dakshineshwar temple and came to Kamarpukur and also stayed a few days in Jairambati. When he was in Kamarpukur, he trained, as we saw how nicely he trained Sri Ma Sharda in all the aspects of life, not just the spiritual aspects, not as a spiritual guru alone, but also in the ways of the world, how she had to carry on her day-to-day activities if in the future she had an opportunity to come to Dakshineshwar. So he was preparing her for that uh, phase of her life, which he knew would be very important because he knew that unlike the previous incarnations in this divine play, it was Sri Ma Sharda Devi who was to play a much bigger role than his own as far as ministration of all the people, the devotees and disciples is concerned. So he was training her, and he was, of course, she was much younger than him in age. So naturally, she was very nicely and correctly trained in both secular and spiritual matters. So, but she writes, Swami Shardanji writes that she made a remark that he left behind an infinite wealth of joy, which she carried back to Jairambati with her. When she left Kamarpukur, when Sri Ramakrishna decided to go back to Dakshineshwar, she left for her home in Jairambati. And we can easily guess what that blissful transformation was. It's not just ordinary bliss, but he had shared with Sri Ma Sharda Devi the infinite spiritual bliss he had gathered through his sadhana. So that effected a transformation in all her movements, in speech, conduct, and how she worked. There was a drastic or a distinct change. That kind of spiritual maturity was seen. So ordinary people, of course, Swami Shardanji says, it is very much doubtful that ordinary people who are more concerned about how a person acts in the worldly sense. For most of the people, for a majority of the people, it is how worldly wise a person is. How does he conduct himself? How clever he is? How mature he seems to be, not spiritually mature, but mature in the ways of the world. How clever he is, how can he somehow manage to get along, even if it means cheating other people. So all these things are signs for a worldly person or a worldly family. These things matter more. How academically brilliant or how practical a person is and how much he can earn. All those secular things assume a lot of importance. But that is why Sardhananji says that it is doubtful that people will notice the noble qualities, the spiritual qualities that develop in a person, because unless one is sensitive to understand and appreciate the spiritual development of spiritual qualities or evolution of a person spiritually, it is very difficult to fathom or to even appreciate. So, Swami Shardanji is right when he says that ordinary people might not have noticed this drastic change. But her behavior changed for the better, in the sense she was very gentle, she was not fickle. Earlier, because of her mother's influence, who listened to all the gossip of the village women who had nothing else to do while taking bath, while going to wash clothes, every time she met people, and even her mother was influenced by their talk. So in Jairambati now, because of her direct contact with Sri Ramakrishna and the training that she received under her, she became gentle but firm and not fickle like before. Very thoughtful and not impertinent. She would not just take a decision. She became very thoughtful, very mature in that sense. And her love was not blinded by selfishness. There was nothing like, oh, this is my family. She had broadened her heart. That is what Swami Shardanji says. Moreover, her experience with Sri Ramakrishna had eradicated whatever little, all kinds of worldly desires from her heart. No doubt she was a great spiritual aspirant in her own right, as Sri Ramakrishna says. In fact, he says she was much greater than I was. But still, that kind of training in this divine play, that kind of training and wisdom had to be imparted by the master, who was not only her spiritual consort but her guru as well. So he made her infinitely sympathetic to the pain and suffering of others. He saw to it that in future she has to play the role of the Divine Mother. And slowly Sri Ramakrishna transformed her through different incidents. We'll see those incidents now, into an embodiment of compassion. So how the compassionate nature of motherhood, which is very natural to a true mother for her children, not only biological children, but the entire humanity. Now those qualities, Sri Ramakrishna was keen that she was developing, or she was evolving into a personality which showed the quality of divine motherhood or motherhood. Due to the influence of her inner bliss, Swami Shardanji says, she neither felt any physical suffering, nor was she disappointed if loving care she gave to her relatives was not reciprocated. She looked after her brothers and others, and they were quite worldly in their requirements. So naturally, in spite of her care and the sympathy that she showed towards all of them, they did not reciprocate, either in kind or otherwise. They did not even bother. They took everything they could from her, including her loving service which she gave to them, and never even bothered to even thank her for that. They never reciprocated. But she never felt any suffering or pain on that account. She had no problem with that. She was content in every respect and absorbed within herself. She passed her days at her father's house. So she went back to Jairambati, and now there was a drastic change because of the days she spent in the company of Sri Ramakrishna. She developed a wonderful nature which made her extremely sympathetic to the pain and suffering of others, but at the same time ignore her own suffering and pain. And she became an embodiment of, literally an embodiment of compassion and contentment, as she often used to say in later life, that contentment is a great virtue. There is no other virtue which is greater than contentment. So that is what she developed, and we will see Swami Shardanji observes this, and he says, why did she have to do all this? She was the Divine Mother herself. Not that these qualities were not present, but in the divine play, the Divine Mother or Ma Sharda Devi had to enact this role. How a ordinary girl, a young girl, who is subject to so much of gossip and worldly talk which goes around, which was very common in those days. If people did not have a spiritual orientation, they would definitely indulge in all these gossips, and that was causing a lot of trouble to the innocent mind of her mother, who thought maybe it is true that Sri Krishna has gone completely mad. So she was very remorseful that whom did I marry my Sarada to? Now I have literally drowned her, as it were, I have killed her by marrying him to somebody who seems to be a madcap, according to a madman, according to the villagers. So naturally, Ma Sharda in the beginning was worried that is her mother, because she knew for certain. But after Sri Krishna came and stayed for nearly 7 months, and that wonderful behavior, at least that removed all the doubts that were in her mind, and she became content in every respect, and she was absorbed within herself. So this is what Swami Shardanand says is a lesson for entire humanity, especially women when they live in the world. Situations will not always be the way we want them to be. Situations will change, situations will, sometimes there will be a lot of adjustment and a lot of peace in the house or maybe the surroundings, but suddenly things will change. Somebody will fall sick, somebody will uh, behave in a very selfish way, and then that will be the test when your patience, your contentment, all those things will be uh, put to test. These qualities, unless one develops when one is young, that is what happened according to Swami Shardanandi, that she was no doubt an embodiment of patience, embodiment of compassion, contentment, whatever good qualities a human being can have, she had, but no doubt it was seen to increase. How it was seen to develop in her, it was these qualities evolved in her, and that gives a hope for innumerable people, that gives hope to innumerable people, especially women. Sri Ramakrishna, Swami Shardanji says, to develop these qualities in one's own life. So how to mold our personality? We have to do that, we have to understand and appreciate the struggle that Holy Mother appeared to play. The divine play means that the divine play was enacted just to show to the world how, in spite of all these difficulties, one can still retain one's patience, perseverance, and also be content, uh, and be thankful to God for whatever God has done for us. And not only that, how to remain absorbed within herself. That is one of the greatest achievements of spiritual life. The whole spiritual life can be put in a few words: how one can be happy with oneself. Our problems come because we cannot face ourselves. We cannot be happy or content. If we are happy, if we have learned the subtle art of being absorbed in the Lord who is residing within the heart. Yesterday also, in the previous class, we saw on Sunday how Kapila Muni and Devahuti, Kapila Devahuti Samvad of Bhagavatam, very clearly she tells her son, who was about to take sannyas and leave home, though she had made all arrangements, she had everything in life. Though her husband passed away, she was very dutiful. She brought up her son, gave him the best type of education. She was satisfied in all respects. But somehow peace was eluding her. So she asked the son, "What do you think is the reason? I have not even missed or maybe neglected whatever duties the scriptures enjoin upon a person. So as a housewife, I did my duties. As a widow also, I did my duties towards the son, towards society, whatever society expects of a dutiful wife, and later a widow or later a mother all the roles she played, she says, I have not performed any, I mean, I have not committed any mistake or any, there was no deficiency in whatever duties I had to perform. I did it to the best of my ability. Still, why don't I have, and I have not harmed others. So why don't I have peace? Now then, Devahuti is told by Kapila Muni, who is the founder of Sankhya philosophy, that we forget to worship the God who is within and also within the hearts of others. It, if logically, if you see, if God is dwelling within, then he dwells within others as well. So to worship the God by ignoring him in the heart of others, or ignore him in, first we have to find him, the Lord, uh, deeply seated or deeply controlling our destiny uh, by being by uh, being present in eternally present in our heart. Though he is eternally present, as Bhagavad Gita, Sri Krishna says, I am running uh, every person or every being by staying in their hearts like a driver runs the machine. So I am the one who drives the machine and you are all machines. We are all machines. So, or we are all sort of puppets which are run by the Lord who sits in our heart. But that discovery has to be made by being absorbed within ourselves. We have to absorb, we have to take some time off. And just as so much of amount we give to fine tune our life, to earn more money, to have a better house, to increase our comforts. Nothing wrong with that. We give a lot of attention to the things around us. We want them to be good and supportive. There's no doubt about it. Without that, we can't even indulge, or maybe we cannot start our spiritual practices. But once that is ascertained, the bare minimum we require for survival, whatever we consider to be the bare minimum, then we have to focus our attention and trying to absorb ourselves, absorb within ourselves. If because Sri Ma Sharda Devi was taught by her Guru Sri Ramakrishna how to be absorbed within herself, she found in the phase after Sri Ramakrishna left to deal with all the gossip, deal with all the problems that she had to face in Jairam Bhatti, ignore them and be content, because if you are absorbed within yourself, as Kapila told his mother, that if you had tried to search for that God within and discovered him, and also finally, as a logical consequence, you discover him in the hearts of others, and if you worship him in that, within the heart of yourself, within your own heart and within the heart of others, then only you will get peace. So that is the parting advice Kapila gives to his own mother. He said other external things, what you do, the rituals that you perform, the duties that you perform, all those things are fine. But at some point in our life, that absorption within has to take a central place in our life. The sooner we do, the better. We should not wait till we cross the Vanaprastha. And of course, there are people who, even after Vanaprastha, they keep themselves occupied and engaged with external things more and more. They, in fact, get more involved. In the beginning, perhaps it was their family and their children. But later, they get involved not only in their family and their children, their own children who have now, by now, they have grown up and become their own become parents. Then there's a extended family of grandchildren. Not that they should be ignored, but the problem is if we if there is no effort simultaneously when we are dealing with our children or even grandchildren, if there is no effort to be absorbed within ourselves, if we don't manage to find some kind of time, it's not selfishness, it is some kind of bare necessity without which a person will be totally lost. So he has to find some time for himself, some time for his sadhana, so some time for what uh, uh, the Guru has asked that person, him or her, to do. If one cannot do that, one cannot remain absorbed within oneself, then it will be very difficult even to survive in the world. It's not that one will realize God by being absorbed. Even to even protect ourselves, to give some kind of security, we need that absorption within oneself. And that is how she passed her days. She understood that let the world go on gossiping, let them do their own business, let them. Uh, uh, I'm least bothered whether they try to impact me, whether they try to tell me many things. Why should I listen? Why should I accept what they say? I'm happy. I'm at peace with myself. I know what is the goal of life. I just follow it. So that was the wonderful lesson. So Swami Shardanji says, though her body was in Jairambati, her mind was with the master at Dakshineshwar because his presence had created that wonderful feeling, that practice of the presence of God, that what we say, Brother Lauren said, we she was now able to practice the presence of her master, her guru, as well as her husband, who had left her, but still her mind, she could connect with her master. That is what we are expected to do. Our Ishta is deep within our heart. One part of the mind should be absorbed in that Ishta. Then it becomes quite easy or quite possible to deal with all the suffering and the pain and suffering that we get by others' behaviors, by for some other reason, for some uh, the change in the surroundings and the people, many things happen and they cause pain and suffering, but we can endure them. So we can control ourselves by focusing within. And though she at times, Sardhananji says, felt an intense desire to go back to the master, she controlled herself. She said, he has given me enough uh, things to think about, to practice, so that I can be absorbed and gather some kind of spirituality. So she believed that since the master had so graciously allowed her and cared for her during the stay here, he would not definitely forget her. And one day or the other, he will make arrangements for her to go when she was old enough, when he thought the time was ripe, or time was ripe enough to uh, call her and allow her to live in Dakshineshwar. He just wanted to make sure that the right thing should be done at the right time. So when the right time arrived, she was sure that he would call her to him. Thus days passed, Swami Shardanji says, one after another, and she waited for that auspicious day. All the while, she was holding on to her firm faith within. She was holding on to the Lord. Now that's the advantage. No matter what situation one is in, at least one part of the mind is at peace. That is what spiritual life is all about. Not that the other part, a small part of the mind is enough to deal with the problems of the universe, but another part of the mind, the important or the discriminative part of the mind, the buddhi, has to be established in the Ishta. That is what Gita says. That buddhi should be made pratishtha. You have to establish it firmly at the feet of the Lord as instructed by the Guru. That is what sadhana does to us. And when we succeed in doing that, then all the ups and downs that we face in the world will not affect us. So here we see holding on to her firm faith in all the instructions he had given her, and then she could wait. She did not mind. She was patient enough. She had patience and perseverance to see that whenever Sri Ramakrishna decides and whenever he calls for her, she would gladly go. So Swami Shardanji concludes by this chapter by saying that union and separation are part of human life. Nobody can be in union. I mean, he's talking of the relations that we form in the outside world. Union with the Lord within, if has to be uh, there cannot be any separation. It has to be eternal. If we feel that separation of the Lord, then again we have to unite with Him. In our mental horizon, the Lord should always be present. But as regards the other people outside with whom we are dealing, union and separation are part of human life. Swami Shardanji says the joy of union is intensified a thousandfold after a long period of separation and intense longing. You might have noticed that if somebody is gone out or gone to some foreign country and he returns after a long time, the joy is much more than one would have if he was coming very regularly or staying very near. Then you don't understand or appreciate the joy of union. So mental union is always, we are talking of the mental union, not the physical union. Mental union is definitely higher than physical union, but spiritual union is higher than mental union. The union that you feel, that yoga means union. Yoga is the union that we have with the Lord within. That is the highest union. But we go after the physical union, the mental union, when we become evolve, when we become more and more spiritually mature, and we get we evolve spiritually, then we'll find that we, instead of mere physical union, we don't need anybody's physical presence. It's better to have a mental union. Our mind is established in something which is eternal, or then we will find that something higher than mental union is also necessary, which can sustain you, and that is spiritual union. So Swami Shardanji now concludes that in the life of avatars also, as a practical demonstration of how to handle union and separation in the world and how to transcend it, how to go from physical union to mental union to spiritual union, we find that in the lives of all the avatars, including Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, we see that Rama was separated from Sita. And there was so much joy when finally they united after he defeated Ravana. So that though the period of separation seems to be unbearable, but the joy of union is intensified thousandfold when one unites after a very long time, physically, mentally, and more importantly, spiritually. While studying, you find then as Rama was separated from Sita, Krishna was separated from Radha after the divine play in Vrindavan, he never came back. The Radha and other uh, gopis had to just wait and wait and wait, and he never came. They all only got, but their mind was on Krishna. Though he was physically not present, he was busy in Dwarka and other places, and he never came. They say he never came back to Vrindavan. But they were happy. The company that they got when he was there, that was enough. That memory was enough to recreate those scenes. And they had so much of devotion. That is why Sri Krishna sends Narada, who thought he was a great devotee. He says, go and see in Vrindavan if you want to know what true devotion is. I am not there. I have not visited Vrindavan for such a long time, and see how the mere memory, the mere spiritual union that they had experienced long ago with the small boy, Sri Krishna, who was hardly 14 years old. So that kind of union, mental or spiritual union, which they had experienced, the joy of that bliss of being in the company of Sri Krishna. So no matter how much viraha they felt, how much of so-called depression they faced when he left, they could somehow, that memory kept their joy alive. They could live only because of that. So also Krishna was separated from Radha. Buddha was also separated from Yashodhara. That is when he decided, after the birth of the small child, he just decided to find out, to get that eternal joy. And he simply went to the forest in search of knowledge or nirvana. So no doubt he missed his wife, and the child Rahul was born. But that period of separation, finally Yashodhara came and joined the order which he had started, but that was much later. So Swami Shardanji says in every incarnation, these things happen. Chaitanya was also, because he had to take sannyas, he had to leave his wife Vishnu Priya uh, and make arrangements for her livelihood, and then he also had to renounce the house. So, is there any meaning? Swami Shardanji asks, why do incarnations enact the same type of lila again and again? Just as we saw Sita and Rama separated, Krishna and Radha separated, this Buddha and Yashodhara, Chaitanya and Vishnu Priya, his wife. When we see the similarity in the different avatars, Swami Shardanji says, is there any meaning? Is it always necessary to separate before to appreciate the idea of spiritual union? He says, Swami Shardanji is very frank. He says, we do not know. Perhaps, he says, he just gives a reason, what seems to be reasonable to him, is that it was a part of that divine play to teach humanity how to be detached from family ties and shun attachments. Now, this is a very important sentence. The divine play of these incarnations, they don't need, they were spiritually empowered, had these qualities, but for our sake, how to manage, how to deal with separation, and how to detach from family ties. The family may be there, but that doesn't mean one has to be attached fully and feel when those people are not there. Especially the parents, when the children leave, they go abroad and settle down. They feel a tremendous kind of virah, or they feel depressed that I cannot see, I cannot live with my child or my son or my daughter. So that without that detachment, life can become extremely difficult for householders. That is why Holy Mother and all these incarnations, Krishna and Radha, Sita and Rama, Buddha and Yashodhara, they showed that in spite of the separation which took place quite early in their life, it was not that they separated after attaining an old age. Most of the time, they just left. Even Sri Ramakrishna had to leave his mother and the entire family and go in search of, because his brother said, you please come to Calcutta. He wanted him to get a job. Of course, he didn't do that. But that separation is definitely necessary. And Sri Ramakrishna, Holy Mother and Swami Vivekananda, who left his house even though there was some crisis going on, that showed that it is a object lesson for humanity, how to at least mentally detach from family ties, so that one can depend on the Lord who is within and find joy in the company of the Lord, and not depend on the company of our relatives who, or even our own children, even though they are very dear to us. Separation and union are inevitable in life. That is what Swami Shardananda has conveyed in this paragraph. Now, after living, Ramakrishna lived with Sharda in Kamarpukur, Jairambati, also for some time in Dakshineshwar, Shampupur and Kashipur, for a total of approximately 10 years. So that is the total period where he, after his sadhana, you should remember that after marriage, for a very long time he never came. But once he came to Kamarpukur, Jairambati, if you count the total number of days, he stayed in Kamarpukur, Jairambati, Dakshineshwar, Shampupur and Kashipur for a total of 10 years altogether. At different phases, he visited Srimati Sarada Devi, used to get a chance to live with him either in Jairambati, Kamar, but all together, including Shampupur and Kashipur, where she was there totally. She was always there with Sri Ramakrishna because he was sick. The days in Shampupur and the Kashipur garden house. But before that, in Dakshineshwar also, she came and she used to stay in the Nahabat, serve the mother of Sri Ramakrishna and also serve Sri Ramakrishna, cook his food, cook the devotee food for devotees. She spent a lot of time in Dakshineshwar as well, and before that, in his frequent visits, whenever it happened in Jairambati and Kamarpukur, she had the opportunity to live. But there were periods when there was this uh, detachment which was developed as a result of separation. So union and separation, Swami Shardanji says, are object lessons in our life, and the incarnations play that role to perfection. They show us how to deal with separation and how to mentally keep connected with everybody who may not be physically present. So that dependence on the gross presence has to be slowly reduced, and then we have to even reduce our mental thoughts, constantly getting upset because somebody is not there, or somebody is all the people whom you want, uh, uh, whose company you want, if they somehow for some reason you don't get it, you get upset because one has not learned the art, Swami Chardanji says, of living to oneself, living within, absorbed in one's own inner self. The Lord who is sitting, who is the source of joy, who is the fountain of joy, but because of her innumerable occasions and getting advice from Sri Ramakrishna, Holy Mother could and could demonstrate before the world that, as she said, there was a picture of joy when we were in Dakshineshwar. Though she could not see him, throughout the day there would be people. She used to just get a chance to meet Sri Ram even while she was in Dakshineshwar, which she now does. She goes there. How she went there, we'll see. But before that, we have to remember that even in Dakshineshwar, it was hardly for a few minutes that she could see the master. Sometimes when she took the food once or twice, that is the only time, and she used to wait till he finished and then bring the plate back. And sometimes Sri Ramakrishna used to visit his mother, who stayed above in the Nahabat above Holy Mother's room. So now and then he would call for her, or he might go there, but that mixing or that union was far less than separation. Separation was there for longer periods of time, sometimes short periods of time, and on a daily basis there was that separation. It's hardly we'll find Sri Ramakrishna and Ma living together. They had their independent lives, a very happy married life, at the same time a totally detached life. So like they were living like sannyasins within the household. On one side, they depended on each other, exchanged ideas. Sri Ramakrishna gave her so much of guidance, so much of love, so much of concern for her. And at the same time, they could do without seeing each other for days and days together. So this is the wonderful Leela, the union and separation of between people, which is a great lesson we have to learn in life. It's not that they played this divine play, whether it was Krishna or Rama or Buddha. Why did they have to do it? It is to become object lessons for humanity. How one can live in a sort of detached, with lot of detachment, and but at the same time being totally attached and absorbed in the Lord who is eternal. Because only that eternal attachment will help us. If we attach ourselves to temporary things, we feel tremendous sorrow when the temporary things vanish from us. So many people, when they lose something in life, whether they lose money, lose people, lose somebody, they cannot recover because they have not found something inside their hearts whom they can hold on to, which is more permanent. Something that the Lord says in the Gita as well as in the Gospel. Sri Ramakrishna also says, the eternal is seated in our heart, very much seated. It never dies. So one has to learn the technique to see our Ishta, who is eternal, who is the eternal Satchidananda Brahman, who is in the heart and who guides us and enables us to be self-dependent, not depend, because as Swamiji said, dependence is always misery. It is always good to be independent. So spiritually, mentally, physically, you see, Holy Mother's life was an excellent example of staying so near but never meeting, and not even bothered. Once in a while, she used to go and give the food, and sometimes even others would request her, and Gopal Ma, Golap Ma, and others used to insist, Yogi Ma, they used to take the food and go, and that would deprive her even from seeing Sri Krishna once. But she never felt, she says, I felt a picture of joy was in my heart. The very idea, the very mental conception that I'm living in the vicinity of this great joyful person, Ananda Rupa Sri Ramakrishna. They say there's a beautiful book, Ananda Rupa Sri Ramakrishna. He is the very embodiment of bliss. So and he had that capacity to transmit. Even today, by meditating on his life, we can enjoy the same bliss which Holy Mother perhaps would have enjoyed in his physical proximity. They might not have stayed in the same room, but that atmosphere that he created, that wonderful joy that he created, nobody can express it better than Holy Mother, who says it was like somebody, Sri Ramakrishna had kept a picture of bliss, and that picture of bliss was constantly overflowing. She could get that feeling even though she did not meet. So now the next chapter, the fourth chapter, is known as the journey. So we will discuss it briefly, and then maybe if somebody wants to ask some questions, you can ask. Just be prepared and type something in the chat box before I conclude. Now the journey chapter, it starts with a beautiful verse which Swami Shardananji has taken from the Rig Veda. In Rig Veda, there is a beautiful verse which says, Charana vai madhu vindati, Charana swadum udumavaram suryasya pasya shrimanam yona tandrayate charana chareveti. The meaning of this verse is to march along. To march means to go forward. Just don't stop anywhere. Whether it is spiritual journey or any other journey, just one has to constantly travel. Otherwise, how can one reach the destination? To march along is to gain immortality. Marching by oneself is the sweet fruit of journey. Look at the sun, even the glorious and eternal traveler, who once having started on his journey has never felt drowsy. Hence, O traveler, march along. Charai Veti, Charai Veti. Swami Vivekananda expressed the same idea and quoted from Buddha. Buddha, who wrote that rhino, the Sutra of the Rhinoceros, that animal with one pointed attention, and it moves towards the goal. It's not bothered even if so many animals come and distract him. He just, when he has decided that he will go somewhere, he will just go on marching. That is the idea. To march along is to gain immortality, and marching by oneself, that art one has to learn. No matter, you may be surrounded with thousands and thousands of people, but our inner journey has to be alone. The journey from the alone to the alone. We came alone, and we are going to go alone. There's nobody in this world who will take some companion with him when he goes. And if that journey has to be sweet, the sweet fruit of that journey, in this reverse from the Rig Veda, which says, Charana vai madhu vindati, Charana swadum, udum varam, suryasya pasya, see the sun, ever glorious. It's traveling alone. You see, nature, everything is traveling alone. Look at the sun, the ever glorious and the eternal traveler, who once having started on his journey has never felt drowsy. Does it stop? It does not wait for anything. Let there be so many problems. The sun goes on round and round eternally. I mean, his sun is traveling across on his own orbit, so also the earth is traveling. So also we are traveling. Our journey is going on. And the problem comes when we think we need people, and when the people leave us, when there is union or separation, we feel our journey becomes desolate, we get bored, we feel lonely, Loneliness can be a big problem. But one who has mastered the art of marching by oneself enjoys the sweet fruit of the journey. That is what Rig Veda says. To march alone, alone, march along alone, like the rhinoceros, which of course he doesn't say, but here he says, Madhu Vindati, it's sweet fruit of journey. The sweet fruit of journey is like traveling alone. Hence, O traveler, march alone, march along, alone. So we have a beautiful Bengali song, Jodike Udak Shune Na Ashe Ekla Chalore. Ekla Cholore, Ekla Cholore. Mean you walk alone. Whether people come, let them come. If they don't come, fine. Now you go on walking. That is taken from this Rigvedic verse, which is from Rigveda. Charaiveti, Charaiveti. March along, march forward. So Tagore has very poetically written that beautiful Bengali song where one is told that whether people, whether like-minded people come, whether they wish to come or whether they come with you, it doesn't matter, but you have to march on. And just march on alone, as the Veda says, just as the rhino marches alone. Let the sun, in the Rig Veda, they say the sun keeps on moving around its axis or the orbit in its own speed, in its own joy, giving light, shedding light to those who want it. So our joy, whatever joy we acquire by going deep within, Holy Mother felt that her journey would be unimpeded. The joy that she found, it was never exhausted. She says, I have never, she says it later in life, or even after the passing away of Sri Ramakrishna, says people always come and tell me they have so much of suffering, so much of sadness. Said, whatever be the problem, I have never faced, I have never become, joy has never left me. When Sri Ramakrishna was there, even after his going for a brief moment, she might have got a jolt, but that divine presence which he had trained her to meditate upon, that became an eternal companion. That is why Swami Brahmananji's book has been named as the Eternal Companion, because the effort that we make to make an eternal companion, that is also mentioned in the Bhagavata. Sri Krishna is the eternal Sakha, the eternal companion. That is how it has come. The word has come because for gopis or for the friends of Sri Krishna and for anybody who came in touch with him, he was their eternal companion. He never left them. Whether it was Draupadi when she was in crisis, whether Arjuna, anybody who wanted an eternal, who tried to develop an eternal companionship with the Lord, he managed to get it, and he was happy to travel alone in the company of the Lord who is with him. That's the idea. So hence, O traveler, march along. Ekla cholore. So we will conclude and let us see what are, if there are some questions. Yeah, Shudiram got a vision that Lord Krishna is going to be born in his house. Not Lord Krishna, it is Vishnu. Of course, Krishna is a manifestation of Vishnu. In Gaya, he got that vision. But Vishnu had 10 avatars who came. Oh, Vishnu, this was not any particular avatar of Vishnu. Though Sri Ramakrishna said, he was Rama, and he who came as Krishna has come as Ramakrishna. So when Vishnu comes, it doesn't matter which avatara. One avatara, when he comes, he is the essence. All the avatars are avatars of Vishnu. They are mostly Vishnu coming in different forms, whether you call it 10 avatars. Bhagavad also mentions 24 avatars. There are so many scriptures which talk of multiple avatars. So whose incarnation was Sri Ramakrishna, and why he was named Sri Ramakrishna, that we can, there is a study made, and it was Totapuri who gave him the name. That is what many people believe. But some people also believe that in his family, though he was named Gadadhar because of the nakshatra, he was named Ramakrishna because there were Others were Rameshwar, Shudiram, Hridayram. That was a tradition in their family that the name should have Ram. But Krishna was added and then it became Ramakrishna. So that is how he was named. And he was the incarnation of Vishnu, neither one particular aspect of Vishnu, that is Dasha Avatara or 24 avatars or whatever category, whatever be the list of incarnations. He was the list of, he was the beyond the list, as Swami Vivekananda said. To say that he's an incarnation is to belittle him. He is the personality who comes from the source from where incarnations come. That is why he wrote that beautiful verse, Om Sthapakaya cha Dharmasya Sarva Dharma Swarupine Avatara Varisthaya. He is the greatest among avatars because he combined in himself the qualities of Rama, the power and the message of Rama, the message of Krishna, and also the message of all the incarnations of Vishnu that preceded him and that would be born later. Like Buddha, even Buddha is considered to be an incarnation. So he was not an incarnation of a specific aspect of Vishnu, but Vishnu himself. Next, the question is, Namaste Swamiji, would I be right in thinking that Thakur was Purusha and the Holy Mother was Prakriti? Yes, we can think because Prakriti and Purusha are not distinct. Shiva and Shakti are abhed. When it manifests, it becomes Prakriti. When it is, that is the word used for Holy Mother is Parama Prakriti. Prakritim Paramam Abhayam Varadam. She is Parama Prakriti. What do you mean by Parama Prakriti? That Prakriti which is just about to create. So before creation, she is one with Shiva, she is one with Purusha, and the Purusha Prakriti Bheda results in this word, this creation. So I will take your leave now, unless there is one more question. Okay, I don't think there's any more question. Om Shanti 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 Harihi Om Tat Sat Shri Ramakrishna Arpanamastu.